Jai Hind, sir. We are very fortunate today to have amongst us a person who will be taking us through the state of affairs or business of war during World War II, and thereafter doing that. So this kind of account will actually help us to understand the situation there. And maybe despite numerous changes in the current day of war fighting and the Geneva Conventions and things like that, the treatment may not be exactly as that. It could be worst or this thing depending on which country which country is the one who is having these prisons of war, and also the country to which they belong. So I would request Vinayak to introduce the speaker, and then we will straightway hear.
Good morning, everyone. Narinder Singh Parmar currently serves as the career advisor at Smiths Hill High School in Wollongong, NSW. He migrated to Australia in 1989, following his tenure as a geography lecturer and NCC Army Wing officer at DAV College, Chandigarh. His teaching career in Australia spans Broken Hill, Crookwell, and Wollongong. He served as head of social sciences faculty for 14 years and has taught geography, legal studies, international studies, political geography, and commerce. Mr. Narinder holds an MPhil in geography from Punjab University, a diploma in education from University of Queensland, and a graduate certificate in career counseling from RMIT. Committed to lifelong learning, he has completed advanced training in NLP mindfulness, the Oxford Executive Leaders Program, and yoga teacher training. His broader professional interests include coaching, mentoring, and motivational education. He conducts workshops for students and teachers during his visits to India, giving back to the community in which he grew up. He has authored 3 books: Turning Point, How to Create a Winning Mindset, and Major Chint Singh, The Man Who Should Have Died. The latter received commendation from former Australia Governor General H.E. General David Hurley. This year, he has brought out the Hindi version of the book. In 2024, Mr. Narinder was invited by the High Commission of India to present his father's World War II survival story at Celebrating Dosti and Mateship in Defense in Canberra, an event highlighting the deep bonds between India and Australian soldiers. Over to you.
All you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, all. And firstly, I wish you a very happy 2026 and hope this new year brings best for you. DG and DDG members. So today, my topic is Major Chint Singh and the Enduring Spirit, Survival, Sacrifice, Resolve of Indian POWs in World War II, a forgotten chapter in Indian military history. Thank you for having me to deliver this lecture on the most harrowing, least recognized, and a forgotten chapter in the Indian military history during the Second World War. It seems the survival stories of 3,000 Indian prisoners of war, of which 2,800 never returned home, are lost in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. Today's presentation focuses particularly on the leadership and resilience of Major Chint Singh, IC 5802 of 2nd Dogras. During Second World War, he was junior commissioned officer and serving in 2x12 Frontier Force Regiment. 12 Frontier Force Regiment was also of Field Marshal Manit Shaw as well. And he was one of the only 201 survivors out of almost 3,000 Indian soldiers taken from Singapore and sent into forced labor between 1943 and 45. In his group, only 13 Indian soldiers from various parties survived, but 2 of them died a night before contact was made by Australian forces. I will come back to these 11 survivors later in the talk. Major Chint Singh memoir, which is titled as Major Chint Singh, The Man Who Should Have Died, offers a rare eyewitness account of brutality and deprivation on one hand, while on the other, it is also a case study in resourcefulness, leadership, human resilience, and emotional psychology of survival. I shall be quoting from his book on memoir from time to time during my talk. Well, let me take a step back in the history. In 1941, Chint Singh was posted at Army Signals Training Center at Jabalpur when he received orders for overseas deployment. His unit boarded the ship called Ashantia on 11th April 1941. In his memoir, he writes, "I said goodbye to my mother country and saluted her from the deck of the ship, not knowing what was my destiny to be." The unit reached Kota Bura, Malaysia, and started preparing the defenses. There was sudden heavy bombing on the nights of 7th and 8th December 1941. At the same time, Japanese itself had landed at many places and started overrun the country. His battalion distinguished itself at several places, received Victoria Cross and several other decorations. Despite stiff resistance by the Allies, Singapore fell on 15 February 1942, with 130,000 Allied troops taken as POWs. Now, if you are interested more on the actions or what happened during that time, it has been well narrated by Lieutenant General Harbakh Singh in his memoir, which is titled as In the Line of Duty, His Soldiers Remember. So this is the books which we talked about, and I was able to present these copies to Chief of the Army Staff on the 10th of October last year. And this was the deployment of his unit in Kota Bura in Malaysia. So that's where the story starts, the descent into captivity. The story of Chint Singh and his mates begins with the transport of Indian POWs from Singapore on 5th May 1943 to New Guinea. The POWs were packed into Japanese cargo boats without the space to lie down or stretch. Dysentery spread quickly among the men, and the lack of sanitation and ventilation forced them into a state of continuous suffering. Requests for necessities like fresh air, water, or even rest was denied. When they arrived at Wewak, 16th of May 1943, they expected a functional town or a camp. Instead, they were met with swamps, jungles, and conditions unfit for habitation. The men marched along beaches and bogs, carrying both their old bundles and Japanese supplies. When walking throughout night without food or rest, they marched further north of Wewak, which you will see up in the north, to a place called Cape Wall, where they were ordered to make their huts, and that was in the swamps. Their blankets and clothing were soaked by rising tides while they slept. The first interaction with the local New Guinea villages were marked by fear. The Indian soldiers, exhausted and displaced, were unprepared for the unfamiliar appearances and customs of indigenous communities. Later, these same communities would become their lifeline, but in the early period, POWs were caught between the cruelty of the captors and the uncertainty of a foreign land. So in this one, you can see that was the landing spot of the Indian POWs. And later on, when he was released, he's showing where his hut was located. Yeah. The story of okay, sorry. So daily life quickly ascended into a routine forced labor, starvation, and violence. Inspections of the sick Indian soldiers by Japanese officers bordered by ritualized cruelty. When a Japanese colonel inspected the prisoners, he touched their foreheads one by one. Anyone with fever, typically a case of malaria, dysentery, or tropical ulcers, was slapped, dismissed as useless, and sent back to the huts. Those without fever were beaten and forced to work at the aerodrome. The doctor who followed repeated the same abuses, declaring that grass and leaves were sufficient medicine for POWs. The Indian POWs requested the Japanese colonel to treat them as laid down by international law. The colonel responded, quote, I do not know any international laws, so therefore your request cannot be granted. If you speak in this manner again, we will shoot you, unquote. Despite the lack of medicine, hundreds of men were forced to work daily from dawn until late night, constructing airstrips and carrying heavy equipment while suffering from various stages of beriberi, starvation, and wounds infected by maggots. The Japanese military code, which demanded absolute obedience even of the sick, turned the jungle of New Guinea in a theater of relentless suffering. Under these conditions, survival depended on ingenuity. The Japanese rations were insufficient even for a single meal a day. Within 2 months, hundreds of men developed acute beriberi and malnutrition. The prisoners soon understood that without additional food, they would simply die. A Formosan laborer, sympathetic to their plight, advised them bluntly, the Japanese will not give anything. You must steal it if you want to live. This became the catalyst for one of the most remarkable aspects of the Indian POW's experience in New Guinea, the creation of an organized system of food acquisition. Led by officers such as Captain Nirpal Chand and later Chint Singh, the POWs organized themselves into slit parties that operated at night or during air raid chaos. They stole rice, dried fish, salt, and medicine from Japanese supplies, hiding their gains into the swamps that the Japanese feared to enter. Some even learned to rob trucks in transit or seize cooked food left behind during the Allied bombing raids. Although men were often caught, beaten, or executed of these acts. The plan was very clear to them. As Chint Singh wrote in his memoir, there were only two courses of action, to steal and live or to die of hunger. We preferred the first, unquote. In April 1944, worn down by heavy bombing and short supplies, the Japanese ordered 400 Indian prisoners of war on a forced march to Holienda, more than 300 miles away through jungles, mountains, and swollen rivers. Many were already too sick to walk. Requests for transport or medical care were met with beatings or threats of execution. The men marched primarily at night due to Allied air attacks, and the sick collapsed by the dozens, left to die on the beach or abandoned along the route. It was during this march that the prisoners lost their most courageous advocate. Captain Nirpal Chand. He had guided them through terror and deprivation, frequently putting himself in harm's way to encourage the weary and terrified. When threatened by Lieutenant Mitsuba, who accused him of inciting resistance, Chand did not falter. Quote, "You make transport arrangements and give medical aid to our sick," unquote, he demanded. He further continued, "We have never marched like this and cannot march." His refusal to bend sealed his fate. He was taken into the bush and executed. His final words to his men were resolute and unshaken. "Don't worry, there are good times ahead." For the prisoners, his death was a devastating blow, but it also thrust Chint Singh into a central leadership role. He inherited a shattered, starving, traumatized group and faced the impossible task of keeping them alive. In the swamps and mountains around Renimbo and the Sepik River, the prisoners endured one of the most horrifying phases of their captivity. The Japanese all but ceased issuing rations, ordering the men instead to survive on sack, spelled as SAC and SAC, sack, the fibrous starch extracted from the sago palm. The process was laborious and yielded food that was tasteless, difficult to digest, and utterly inadequate for sustaining life. The Indians supplemented this meager diet with jungle grass, insect, snakes, lizards, and anything that could be scavenged. The environment became another adversary. Torrential rain collapsed their huts, leaving men to sleep in mud. Clouds of mosquitoes descended, sapping their remaining strength. Tropical ulcers consumed limbs, and without dressing or medical tools, maggots infected open wounds. The death toll rose steadily. Men died not only from disease and starvation, but from exhaustion, despair, and the Japanese brutality. Some were executed for stealing small items of food. Others were killed for not being able to walk. One of the many incidents covered in the memoir, a Japanese corporal searched the hut of Jamedar Harnan Singh of 6 by 14 Punjab Regiment and found a bottle of quinine. He was tied to a tree, and all Japanese guard started beating him with stick and kicking him. Later, he died. You will find similar incidents in memoir, quite a few in numbers. Some were even shot for stealing 4 oranges. During this time, moments of compassion came from the most unlikely sources. New Guinea villagers risked their lives to provide the prisoners with pumpkins, bananas, pork, fish, and other food. On one occasion, a native woman traveled miles to deliver food daily to Chint Singh, enabling him to maintain enough strength to support others. These spontaneous acts of humanity stood in stark contrast in the systematic cruelty of the Japanese guards, and Singh never forgot the generosity of the indigenous community. The leadership under such circumstances required more than authority. It required emotional stamina and moral imagination. Singh often confronted despair. He later described sitting alone under a tree, overwhelmed by exhaustion and contemplating suicide. But each time, the responsibility he felt towards the men around him rekindled his resolve. Hope became the most powerful tool he had. He reassured dying soldiers that Americans were coming soon, even when he himself doubted the truth of his words. These reassurances, sometimes well-intentioned falsehood, became lifelines to those whose bodies were falling or failing. As Allied aircrafts were overheard, men on their deathbeds would ask, saying, "Sir, will the Americans come by the end of the month?" He would answer with confidence, though he did not believe in it. For many, these promises allowed their last days to be lived with hope rather than terror. By mid-1945, the Japanese were losing the war, but their brutality intensified. Soldiers who attempted to signal Allied aircrafts were beheaded. Men too weak to walk were executed. The last months were filled with fear, and the Japanese would eliminate the remaining POWs before surrendering. In September 1945, after Japan's capitulation, a Japanese officer approached Singh during the night to announce that the war was over and the prisoners would be released. Even then, Singh replied cautiously, aware that a single mishap could end in execution. He chose his words carefully, praising the Japanese to avoid giving them any reason to kill the last survivors. Singh writes in his memoir, on 28 September, the 13 of us were brought in a steamer to Narinder. Even at this stage, the Japanese were not ready to accept their defeat in the war. Before we arrived in Narinder, another two lost their lives. Sepoy Jairam and Abraham died at an interval of half an hour. They died happily. Early in the morning, Sepoy Jairam told me, quote, "Sir, I know I will not see India in the New World, but I'm happy now to know we are no longer prisoner of war. I think I am like a free man and will die like a free man, and my soul shall be free. I'm not dying as the other Indians have died by breathing their last breath under the Japanese pressure. Their souls will not find any rest, but I'm confident I'm dying a peaceful death, and it is enough for me. I wish that you all go safely home and see your families. When you reach home, see my parents and tell them Jairam died a peaceful death and there is no need for them to worry." 2 days later, the breakthrough came. A letter arrived from Lieutenant F.O. Monk of the Australian forces, instructing the Japanese to bring POWs to Angoram. When the survivors reached the Australian camp, the emotional impact was overwhelming. Monk later recalled in his memoir how the 11 surviving Indians stood at rigid attention despite their physical condition, and how Chint Singh, still maintaining military formalities, saluted and declared, "Sir, one officer, two NCOs, and 8 other ranks, reporting for whatever the duty the King and the Australian Army requires of us." I found it very hard to reply to him. I still feel much emotion when recalling it, unquote. On the part of Singh, this is the embodiment of military resolve. Even after 3 years of starvation, torture, humiliation, he stood at attention, saluted, and offered services. This is leadership distilled to its purest essence. In the care of Australians, the POWs were given food, medicine, clothes, and dignity, things they had been denied for almost 3 years. Singh described this moment as a rebirth. The return of humanity after years of living in a condition worse than death. Chint Singh and his 10 mates were treated at 2x15 Field Ambulance, Boram Beach at Papua New Guinea. One of the nursing staff, Sergeant Ron Bader, showed remarkable kindness to the Indian soldiers. Hamir Singh, who spoke English, often dealt with the ward, but Sergeant Bader personally checked on everything to ensure the men were well cared for. He took a genuine interest in their comfort. Sergeant Bader even wrote to their families in India, assuring them that their sons were safe and being looked after. When the men grew stronger, he took them to the cinema, creating memorable moments of joy for these Indian soldiers. With warmth, generosity, and care, left a lasting impressions on all of them. So this is Lieutenant Omang, and that was the time when they were rescued and reporting to Lieutenant Mang. I will talk about this. When they were brought to Narinder, Lieutenant Horden, a naval officer, he brought his vessel, which was ML 1347. You can see, and this is from the memoir written by Lieutenant Horden, Merciful Journey. And in that book, he has included these these photos. And Chint Singh, you can see there, and there is another Indian soldier and being transported to other place. This is Ron Bader, the nurse which I talked about, and these are Indian soldiers, and of course with the Australian nurses of the 15th Field Ambulance. Singh writes in his memoir, 15th November 1945 was a sad day for me and my men, the day of departure. The hospital staff were also very sad, especially Major Widmer and Sergeant Ron Bader. Both took a keen interest in our welfare. My 10 comrades were ready to fly to Rabaul, which is in North New Britain, north of Papua New Guinea, to catch a ship home to India, home which we longed to see. Many of the hospital staff and I accompanied my 10 friends to Aerodrome. I was to retain behind at 6th Australian Division, needed me as chief witness in the Australian War Crime Commission against the Japanese war criminals. Their last words as they boarded the plane still echoes in my ears. In commas, you have guided us magnificently for 3.5 years, but now you leave us alone. We are sure that it was your luck which saved us, and we will miss you very much. Unquote. At the aerodrome, they were photographed by many Australians, and then the plane took off. Tears came to my eyes and ran swiftly down my cheeks. When I looked at Sergeant Ron Bader, he was going with same emotions. So we consoled each other and then returned to camp. It was not very late in the evening on 16th November 1945 when Captain Bruce, with whom my father was attached during the War Crime Commission was going on, returned to the mess and found Sergeant Ron Bader waiting at the door. I was very surprised to see him there, as he was exhausted and confused. He walked 5 miles to see me. I asked what was worrying him. He led me to a tent and we sat down. He was very sad and in a low voice told me that he had heard the news. The plane in which my friends were traveling had crashed and all passengers had been killed. It was a great shock to me and made me weep. It still sounded unbelievable to me, so I went to the signals office and asked for confirmation. They signaled Army headquarters in Leh and confirmed the crash. He even told me that the names believed killed. The next morning, I read the following in the paper titled Unique Gold. Under a big heading, 28 believed killed in New Britain crash. This was the tragic end of my dearest friends with whom I had sincere brotherly love. They have left a black spot on my mind forever. So these were the 10 Indian soldiers before boarding the plane. And that was reported in one of the newspaper of the tragic accident crash. This was Chint Singh on the duty when he was attached with the 6th Australian Division, and where you can see the Japanese, he's identifying, there is an identification parade, and he was identifying those who have done the war crime. And you can see the Australian forces there as well. And he's in the other one, in the small one, he's writing his evidences as well, which were used during the War Crime Commission. This was, I mentioned to you about Captain Doug Bruce of the 30th Australian Infantry Battalion, and he was his tent mate. So then the next one is the mateship that endured beyond the war. Major Chint Singh was detained as a witness at the War Crime Commission. He was attached to the 6th Australian Division and shared the tent with Captain Bruce and Captain Lieutenant Rainey. In January 1946, Chint Singh wrote a farewell letter, this is the one, to the Australian 6th Division. And the information which I'm sharing with you is from Professor Peter Stanley. He's a historian, military historian, and he wrote personal stories remembering the war in New Guinea. In the letter he wrote, that is Chint Singh, the sympathy, love, and affection shown by every individual in the division will always be with us, and we and our countrymen will be very proud of it. Chint Singh expressed his desire for the future direction in this relationship, which concluding in his letter, hoping that the friendship of our country, of your country and India will continue for all the time. And this letter is in the Australian War Memorial. It's been in their archives. So Captain Sharp, a member of the 2nd Military History Field Team, recommended that the letter be retained. Captain Sharp stated that Singh had been a particular friend of everybody at 6th Division, and his gesture of farewell is, I think, something the Australian forces to be proud of. A clear testament to the mateship and deep respect that had developed between Major Chint Singh and Australian forces by the end of World War II. Another example of mateship and how much it meant to either side is Chint Singh being honored by Australian Army and invited to sign the Japanese surrender flag, which is displayed in Australian War Memorial in Canberra. He also got wide coverage in the Australian media too. Major Chint Singh's memoir also recounts his travels to various Australian cities while serving as the chief witness, giving readers a glimpse of Australia in the late 1940s through the eyes of an Indian soldier. So this is Sergeant Eric Spark, and he was again seen, he wrote this story, was way back in 1952 or something like that. And I happened to be able to contact Sergeant Eric Sparks' family. In fact, I just missed by a few days. He passed away, and then I was contacted, and then I attended Eric Sparks' funeral. And I had this copy, and I presented his family a copy of this newspaper article. This was, I framed and gave that to him or the family, and it was kept under next to his coffin at the cremation time. This is another one where in Perth, Field Marshal Montgomery was visiting, and my father was being hosted by one of the major journal there. And before Field Marshal Montgomery boarded, he was introduced by Major General Whitlaw. Major General Whitlaw was one of the members of the War Crime Commission, and he was introduced to Field Marshal Montgomery at that time. In 1970, the national branch of RSL is exactly the same as what we have here, ex-servicemen leave. So that is called as retired service leave in Australia. And they invited Major Chint Singh to join the commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the end of World War II in Wewak and Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. He received wide media coverage, and his speech on the occasion reflected a changing geopolitical scenario. He visited those sites where he had, this is Doug Bruce family. This little girl is Janet. She's married to, and she's now in, I think, probably 80s. I met them as well, both the girls. So this was in 1970. I returned to Wewak, and this is a publication of that occasion. And this is the Chint Singh laying wreath at that memorial in Wewak. And this is where I mentioned about Captain Horden. So he met there at that occasion, and other Australian officers as well at that time. And as I just said, that he visited all the places. This is the river where Marsden Horden brought his ship, and that's where he is doing his prayers. These natives were the one who actually helped him in 1945, and he was able to reconnect with them as well. He visited all those sites when he had been acquainted with. After his return, he submitted a report to Army Headquarters, a reflection of his visit, and made some recommendations to promote defense bilateral India-Australia relations. Let's go to this one. 1971. So in 1971, the following year, when he visited by himself, in 1971, RSL National Branch erected 3 monuments to honor Chint Singh and other Indian POWs in Papua New Guinea. Unfortunately, these monuments were washed away by Sepik River, the flooded, so it was washed away. But that was the plaque was placed in 1971 on one of the memorials. During their captivity, a common understanding among the Indian prisoners was that whosoever managed to escape would one day tell the world their story. Major Chint Singh never thought that this responsibility would ultimately fall on him. He was working on his memoir when he passed away in a military hospital in Lucknow in 1983. So that was the unfinished task, which probably over a period of time, I took that responsibility to tell the world his story, not only his story, but his men's story as well of 3,000 Indian POWs. How much his friendship meant to the Australian mates reflected in condolence letter that we received, the family received from Marsden Horden. Inverted commas. I was completely saddened to hear in your letter of 16th March of the death of your dear father and my true friend and comrade, Major Chint Singh. Our friendship commenced in terrible times of cruelty, murder, privation, and suffering. And yet in all this, your father shone out as one of the bright stars of heaven. Because your father was disciplined, intelligent, and courageous, he was never defeated by the most terrible cruelties. And because he was a leader of men, he encouraged others to fight against impossible odds. I will never forget our association, and many letters and photographs I have from him are among my most treasured possessions. Many other Australians who knew him in those hard times and since have been enriched by his friendship, unquote, as before. So this is the 1971, the memorials. Colonel Bandari was the military attaché to Australian High Commission in 1971, so he was invited to honor that, unveil the plaques. So the legacy and a testament of human resolve. Of the 3,000 Indian POWs sent to New Guinea, 2,800 of them paid an ultimate sacrifice. Their stories remain one of the most extraordinary accounts in the Asia-Pacific theater. At the center of this narrative stands Major Chint Singh, whose action illuminated the profound impact of leadership. His resourcefulness, emotional intelligence, and moral courage demonstrate that leadership is not a title, but a behavior, forged under fire and proven in the darkest conditions. His story enriches our understanding of Indian military history, reshapes our perspective on POWs' experiences, and reminds us of the endurance of the human spirit when confronted with annihilation. The story of the Indian POWs in Papua New Guinea, and especially Major Chint Singh, is a powerful reminder that history is shaped not only by armies and empires, but by quiet bravery of individuals who refuse to surrender and their humanity. And this demands recognition and should be honored for generations to come. As scholars and researchers, you can see here around, our task is to keep these narratives alive, to analyze them, to teach them, to ensure that such acts of silent heroism are never forgotten. It is a moral responsibility to share their stories and not let it lose or forgotten in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. Dear guests, I will stop here for question and answer sessions, and then once we finish, I will request you to stand and we'll just pay 1 minute's silence prayers to those who never came home, of 2,800 Indian soldiers. So I'm open for question and answer.